It's important stuff. I yield the floor and suggest the absence of quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Alsa Brooks.
Not approve of domestically. Not surprisingly, our partners did not put their trust in such negotiations. While tariffs inherently may be seen at odds with free trade, we must also acknowledge that many of our trading partners deploy barriers that have gone unchallenged for too long. Free trade, by definition, must be reciprocal. We do not have it if others can impose barriers on us unchallenged. Our failure to enforce our rights over the last 4 years lost a lot of ground for us. This cannot continue because what I am certain about is that American goods and services are innovative, high quality, and globally competitive. Senior administration officials say that a number of countries are coming to the table to engage with the USTR. We look forward to hearing about this engagement and the steps toward better opportunities for Americans. With that, I turn to Senator Wyden for his remarks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman and colleagues, today's hearing on the President's trade agenda begins with American retirement funds, investors, and our economy in purgatory thanks to Donald Trump's plan to hike tariffs to levels not seen since before the invention of the automobile. Prices are continuing to increase. Markets for made in the USA products are slamming shut around the world. The U.S. economy has gone from the envy of the world to a laughingstock in less time than it took to finish March Madness. Through it all, Donald Trump and his advisors have yet to provide an understandable explanation, any explanation for what his tax hike on the American people is supposed to accomplish. And so this morning, I'd like to focus on one central question. What is the plan? In the last week, the White House has been all over the map when it comes to this question. There is no clear message of how the tariffs were determined, what they're supposed to accomplish, how long they'll be in place, whether they're a negotiating tool or a move to try and cut the United States off from global trade and usher in a new era of 1870s-style protectionism. In the days since Donald Trump announced his tariffs, the President and his advisors have repeatedly changed their stories on all of these questions. Last Thursday, Donald Trump said, quote, "The tariffs give us great power to negotiate," just after Secretary Lutnick and a top economic advisor told reporters the tariffs were not up for negotiation. Then the stories changed again on Sunday when the Secretary of Agriculture and the top White House economic advisor, Kevin Hassett, both said Trump's tariffs were bringing foreign countries to the table, hoping to negotiate new deals to cut tariffs. At nearly the same time, the Treasury Secretary was on TV Sunday saying the tariffs would remain in place for, quote, days and weeks. Asked if the tariffs were up for negotiation, the Commerce Secretary said Sunday, "The tariffs are coming." He announced it, and he wasn't kidding. The tariffs are coming. And yesterday in the Oval Office, Donald Trump said there can be permanent tariffs and there can also be negotiations. So again, this morning, what we want to know is what is the plan? The stock market is up a bit this morning on yet another round of rumors that Donald Trump might not go through with his full barrage of tariffs. Yet this weekend, Donald Trump retweeted a post on Truth Social arguing that Trump is crashing our economy and markets on purpose as a strategy to lower interest rates. Is it possible that's the plan? Tank the economy so wealthy people can borrow money more cheaply? We know that billionaires like Howard Lutnick and semi-billionaires like Scott Bessent won't mind paying more for groceries or gas. It's a drop in the bucket for them. But for families, higher costs are going to get hurt. Higher costs are going to hurt. The nonpartisan Yale Budget Lab predicts the tariffs will cost families $3,800 in the first year alone. In Mr. Greer's confirmation hearing, he argued that economic security leads to strong national security. Our country is getting the opposite with these pointless tariffs. Destroying the foundations of our economy is not only disastrous for workers and families, it makes our people less safe. So you look at Stellantis, the auto company, laying off 900 workers in response to the tariffs. I talked to Pacific Northwest fruit growers who are being told no more American exports, and I hear from small businesses in Oregon that they'll have to pay more for the materials they use to make their products. and I worry that Americans will soon be poorer and face greater threats to our national security thanks to these Trump policies. Is that the plan? Colleagues, I'm going to close with this. The Trump aimless, chaotic tariff spree has proven beyond a doubt.
American people trust President Trump. His policies, which put Americans first, will deliver the strongest economy in the world. For far too long, American workers have been taken advantage of. And President Trump has made it clear, we will no longer put American workers at an unfair advantage. Imagine starting a football game 2 touchdowns behind. Or imagine being Houston and starting with a 25-point lead. Perhaps they would have won the game last night, right? For the past 50 years, that position the United States has actually been in. That is the position that the United States of America has been in for the past 20-plus years. Think about it. Across 132 countries and more than 600,000 products, U.S. exporters face higher tariffs 2/3 of the time. That is the definition of unfair and completely unacceptable. Remember, the goal is to level the playing field, and the president is already bringing our trade partners to the table. Look at Vietnam and Japan. Already, businesses have started adjusting and restructuring. They are investing in America. The president has secured $5 trillion of investments in the United States in his first 2 months, including my home state of Michigan, where Apple announced their intentions to launch a state-of-the-art manufacturing academy. This is proof that president's negotiations work. And high-paying, skilled manufacturing jobs will follow these investments to America. Just look at the job numbers from last week. Payrolls increased by 228,000. Payroll increased by 228,000 jobs in March. That was 88,000 more than forecasters had expected. And according to the private sector employment report, in March, 21,000 new jobs were added in manufacturing. Something unimaginable a year ago. Look, the reality is Biden left behind a broken economy, and the status quo won't fix it. No one should fault President Trump for trying unconventional ways to get us out of this mess, because that's what it's going to take. House Republicans know that President Trump's long-term strategy will pay off. Now, changing gears and moving on to this week in our work to advance President Trump's agenda, Americans expect us to do our job. This week, we need to pass the SAVE Act and secure our elections. Stop rogue judges from stalling President Trump and the American people's agenda. Reverse Biden's disastrous policies and advance our one big beautiful bill, which will help get our economy back on track again and give our markets some certainty. And we said this from the get-go. There may be growing pains, but House Republicans are unified behind our common goal to deliver on the mandate that the American people gave us. And now I will turn it over to the man who will help do that, which is our whip, Tom Emmer.
How about that, Alex Ovechkin? Oh, wrong group. Sorry. President Trump's multi-pronged economic strategy to renew the American dream demands congressional action. The stakes are high. House Republicans must work in tandem with President Trump to deliver the agenda that 77 million Americans sent here to enact. This includes renewing President Trump's successful tax policy in order to give Americans the financial certainty and prosperity they deserve. In addition to the administration's historic actions to secure nearly $5 trillion in investments and trade commitments and a massive deregulation campaign. House Republicans must also ensure the continuance of the 2017 Trump tax cuts through reconciliation. We're excited, by the way, to host U.S. Treasury Secretary Bessent later today for a roundtable to address the importance and urgency of getting this done. Remember, the Senate version of the budget resolution does not prevent the House from achieving the goals we set for ourselves earlier in this process. In fact, it doesn't mean a thing to the House. We will continue to advocate for the final reconciliation bill to include historic spending reductions while protecting essential programs. But we must act now to bring the process to moving the America First agenda on track. The American people are hungry for economic prosperity. They were denied for 4 long years under Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. Together, the Republican trifecta can deliver that prosperity and return hope of financial freedom to every American. The work ahead will not be easy, but we will get it done. Failure in Congress could mean failing President Trump and the American people, and that is not an option. With that, I turn it over to our leader, Mr. Scalise.
Thank you, Whip. This is a really important week, not just in the House, but for the ability for Congress to join with President Trump and deliver on that agenda that we all ran on. We all know what President Trump said at his rallies, talking about getting America back on track, securing the border, locking in tax rates, no tax on tips, producing more energy in America, getting rules and regulations under control. All of those things are in this one big, beautiful bill that we have been focused on for more than a year in the House. But President Trump's not the only one that ran on all of those objectives. We did too. House Republicans ran on those same things. We need to follow through now and get the job done. And nobody said it would be easy. It wasn't easy to get the budget passed a few weeks ago. Some, in fact, not necessarily saying anybody in this room, but some said the bill might not pass. And yet we passed the bill without a vote to spare because we know our margins are narrow. But our commitment is firm on getting this done because, as the Whip said, failure is not an option. And so today is no different where we are than where we were the same week that we passed the budget over a month ago. There are members that have questions. That's not a surprise. On any big bill we've dealt with, going back to 2017, when we did the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, there were members who had questions, and our job is to continue answering those questions while moving the ball forward. But it's critical that we advance this agenda, that we don't delay, because passing the budget doesn't end the process. It starts the reconciliation process. We can't even begin reconciliation until the budget's done. And if some people think we can just wait for the Senate to catch up to the House, we could talk all day about the fact that they're not against what we're trying to do. They just haven't gotten to that point. The months of meetings and negotiations that we've had in the House, the back and forth with CBO that we have done, which, by the way, has yielded some really big improvements in the CBO scoring. Some of it is just coming in from the initial scoring from the CBO because we disagreed with their numbers, but we didn't just yell and scream. We went back to them, and we're now getting CBO to give us better numbers on the savings that we'll achieve from things like work requirements and some of the other reforms that we all agree upon. But we cannot delay the country. Can't afford for us to delay a month or longer to wait on the Senate getting where we are. We've got to continue to move forward, and the bill that we have before us allows us to do that. It allows us to achieve all the savings that we laid out in the House bill. It allows us to achieve all the border security we laid out. It allows us to achieve all the things we want to do to stabilize the tax code. But think about this, because people are watching the markets, and that's understandable. There is trillions of dollars on the sidelines, and I've heard this from so many people in different industries all across the country, trillions of dollars that are not looking at tariffs, that are looking to see what Congress does on the tax code. And they're not going to make those investments until they see a stabilized tax code that doesn't expire at the end of this year, but in fact gets renewed for 10 years, ideally permanently, to lock in tax rates so you don't have a massive tax hike on the country. And we need to remove that uncertainty. The president can't do that. Congress needs to do that, House and Senate combined. So the president is all in. You saw his Truth Social post yesterday. We're all in as well. And yes, members will continue to raise questions. We're going to continue working through that process, but we can't stop the advancement of our agenda. Democrats don't want this economy to turn around, but we do. We ran on it. We're committed to it. And our leader in that effort is our Speaker, Mike Johnson.
Thank you. Rarely do I get to raise the podium level, but I'm going to take great pleasure in doing that. Thank you.
Whatever I can
Yes,
do to
yes,
help.
that's right. It was too low for me. Everybody note that for the record. Hey, good morning. Glad to have you all here. It's a very, very busy week on Capitol Hill, as you know. We had a great boost of excitement in the Republican conference meeting this morning. We welcomed our 2 new members from Florida. We were delighted to win those seats handily, and so Congressman Jimmy Petronis and Randy Fine join us. We got them on their committees, and they are joining the team. That team is going to be very busy, as you heard, the recount of sort of what we're going to be working on over the next few days here. Between now and Thursday, the House is going to pass some really important legislation. We'll ensure that only American citizens decide American elections, as you heard. We're going to prevent activist judges from issuing these unconstitutional nationwide injunctions and legislating from the bench, which has become a real problem. And we're going to roll back 2 burdensome Biden-era CFPB rules. This is all common sense issues, and they're things that make sense to the American people. Let me talk about the SAVE Act very briefly. You've heard some about this already. Polling shows that nearly 90% of the American people believe that proof of citizenship should be required to vote. There are few issues in American politics that enjoy that level of bipartisan support. This should pass with a massive bipartisan margin, but watch, it won't. The Democrats are contorting themselves into a pretzel trying to justify some sort of vote against this. Last year they argued we were too close to a federal election to make voting changes. And then they said that non-citizens don't actually vote. And then they said the SAVE Act will somehow result in voter suppression. All that was total nonsense. Now they're claiming that the SAVE Act disenfranchises married women who change their last names. I mean, it's absurd. What they're trying to do is protect the ability of non-citizens to participate in our elections. Plain and simple, that's what this is about. And we know it's a crisis because the last administration, as we all well know, opened the border wide, and we had, by some counts, 20 million illegal aliens come into the country, right? There's no mechanism in federal law, in current law, that requires states to prove citizenship. So even though it is currently against the law, only U.S. citizens should decide U.S. elections, there's no way to make sure that's actually happening. So the SAVE Act is so critically important. It follows common sense, and the American people are with us. The Democrats, I predict, will not be, and they're going to have to answer for that. Let me talk about reconciliation. You heard a lot about this. This is the mechanism that we have to advance the Trump agenda in a big way and deliver results to the American people, all those who voted for these big changes. And this week, we're working in the House to advance the Senate's amendment to our budget resolution, as you know. Just to recount this, we've been working on this for over a year. We started this process well before most of the people in this room agreed with us that we would have this moment of unified government where we would have Republican majorities in the House and Senate, and of course the White House as well. And so we started that process. I want to make 4 important points about the Senate's amendment to our House resolution. Number 1, the budget resolution is not the law. Okay, all this does is it allows us to continue the process, begin drafting the actual legislation that really counts, and that's the one big beautiful bill. Number 2, the Senate amendment makes no changes to the reconciliation instructions that we put into the budget resolution. So our objectives remain intact. Number 3, any final reconciliation bill has to include historic spending reductions that we included in our resolution, while also safeguarding essential programs. And you've heard a commitment from us over and over that will happen, and the president has said it himself over and over as well. The fourth point is that reconciliation will be a collaborative process between the House and Senate. You're going to see the Republican Party in both chambers working together as one team. I know that's a rare occasion and people don't really know what that looks like, but we're actually going to do it this time. The House is not going to participate in an us versus them charade. We won't do it. To secure and accomplish our mission, we got to be working together and rowing in the same direction. And I'm fiercely committed to doing that, and so is Leader Thune and our members on both sides. Passing this amendment just allows us to get off the sidelines and get on the field and start this game. It's the kickoff, so to speak, with one of my football metaphors, and we got to get this done. Republicans have an historic, once-in-a-generation opportunity to deliver relief to hardworking families and set our country back on the path of prosperity. The American people desperately need us to take this action, and we will. As we wrote in a letter to our conference this weekend, time really is of the essence. There's a lot of pressure points that are outside of our control but are forcing this action. We're months away from the X-date on the debt limit. The border security resources are being diminished. Markets are unsettled, and the largest tax increase in American history is set to hit families and businesses at the end of this year if we do not act. And for all those reasons, we have no luxury of complacency, and we really don't have time to dither on this thing. So we'll be moving that forward, and you'll see that action this week. Okay, with that, I'll take a few questions. What we got?
Question on two tax proposals that are being talked about at the White House. Just want to get your official comment on them. One, a 40% millionaire surtax is still being talked about over there. What's your opinion on that? And the second is an export tax credit to help those who are facing, such as in China, retaliatory tariffs. What are your thoughts on those?
Well, look, I'm not going to comment on specific proposals because there's hundreds of them on the table right now, and I don't want to put my thumb on the scale. I mean, generally, we're trying to reduce taxes around here, so that's a general principle. But we'll have to see. We've got a lot of great ideas. The formulation that we'll try to work on and complete over the coming weeks, the next several weeks, few weeks, I hope, maybe several weeks, is to get to the point of consensus on all of those different factors and finding the level that will not only, as I said, reduce spending and change the debt trajectory for the country, but also protect our essential programs, and I'm convinced that we can do both. So, yes, sir.
You mentioned resources for border security. In yesterday's Supreme Court ruling on the Alien Enemies Act, the justices unanimously reaffirmed migrants' rights to a hearing before removal. Should Congress allocate additional funding to the judiciary to address a possible backlog of cases and to ensure potential deportees get due process?
Well, due process is an important principle, and of course we support that, and we have to give Customs and Border Patrol agents and everybody involved in the process the resources they need to get the job done. It does require additional resources because we have so many people to process because the last administration opened the border wide, and it's a serious crisis. And I think that was top of mind for most of the people who voted in this last election. We don't know what the specifics are yet. We do applaud the ruling for the Supreme Court. The most important principle that came out of that is that they said that you can't go venue shopping for this. They're going to return that back to the court in Texas where it belonged, and I think that's a very important step. The reason that we're passing the No Rogue Rulings Act this week is because we're concerned about this, what really is a constitutional crisis. And you've heard the stats, but I think it's 62% or 64% of all the injunctions, national injunctions that are issued against a president or against Donald J. Trump over the last several decades, and 90% of those or something were issued by judges that were appointed to the federal bench by Democrat presidents. I mean, it just looks on its face to be a serious issue, and Congress has to address it. And so Congressman Darrell Iss's bill is a really good measure to take some control in that area, and we're looking forward to that development. Yeah, front row.
Mr. Speaker, I wanted to ask you, it's been 3 months since the wildfires in Los Angeles. I know Governor Newsom sent your office a letter asking for additional funding. Have you been able to review that letter? Can you tell us a little bit about where those discussions stand on that funding?
Well, look, the California wildfires is something that it's a request for supplemental emergency spending, and all of this is kind of wrapped together in all of the deliberations we're making right now. Reconciliation is the most immediate and urgent thing on our plate, but we can walk and chew gum at the same time. I'll tell you that there's some internal discussion about it, but it hasn't advanced yet, but stay tuned on that. So, second row, yes, sir.
HHS Secretary Robert Kennedy has now put in a call to the CDC to stop putting fluoride in drinking water. I want to get your thoughts on that, as health advisors have constantly said that they advise against that.
Yeah, it's an interesting issue. I don't profess to be an expert in chemistry. I do constitutional law primarily, but I'll tell you that I think it deserves, from what I've read and from what I understand, it deserves real evaluation. There's a concern that it may be having a negative effect on the health of children, and obviously we have an obligation at the federal government level to look into that. So I'm as interested as you are. I don't have the answers, but I think it's one that the question has been begged and it needs to be addressed. So thank you. Thank you, Speaker.
The vulnerability that exists as a result of China basically processing 90% of the critical minerals in the world that are essential for our daily lives.
Yes, Senator, and that figure is always one that gives me great concern, the 90% of the processing. We do have critical minerals in the United States. We have lithium here. We have other critical minerals here. And a lot of it is that China has centralized the processing of minerals, right? We have in the Western Hemisphere, in Bolivia, in Chile, we have all kinds of critical minerals, and that's in our hemisphere. But they get sent to China, they're processed, and they come here, and then if China wants to exercise economic coercion or other practices, they do have a stranglehold on these kinds of things. That's a very dangerous situation to be in. I mean, this is part of the urgency of what we're talking about. And I think as the Trump administration certainly takes action on trade, but also takes action on the environmental side and permitting and regulation, that's an area where we can actually have more of that activity here in the United States, or we can work with our trading partners to try to incentivize production there as well.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Senator Bennett.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ambassador, it's good to see you again. Could you talk a little bit about the relationship of the tariffs that you have put on and rising prices for the American people? What is it the American people should expect to be able to suffer as a result in terms of rising prices? I understand your position is that the long-term gain is worth the short-term pain, but what is that short-term pain going to look like?
So Senator, I think we can look at, I think we should look at history and data for this. You know, it's hard to project what's going to happen with prices, but we know in the first Trump term, the president imposed historic tariffs on China on an enormous amount of goods coming from China. And during that time, inflation went down by 0.1%. During the Biden administration, the historic inflation was not on imported goods or related to tariffs that President Biden put in place. It was related to, frankly, services, healthcare, education, et cetera. So I think there's not really a one-to-one on tariffs and price effects, and so many things go into price. I know you think I'm probably like dodging and weaving on this, but I'm looking at data, sir,
Yeah,
and the data shows it's not one-to-one.
I know you're smart enough to know that the likelihood is that prices are going to go up for the American people as a result of the tariffs that you put in place. Do you disagree with that?
Oh, I
mean,
think
when you say that the in your testimony that you expect the American people will bear the burden, or that, and I'm sure they will bear any burden on some level, but what do you think that burden is actually going to look like?
Well, I think the challenges, frankly, are going to be more for companies that are largely dependent on imports from China and Asia, where they have to adjust their supply chains in a quick set of time. Yeah. And the way the tariffs get allocated between the foreign, the foreign producer and the importer, that's where the majority of adjustment
And we have a bunch
comes.
of those companies in Colorado, and I know that Osprey Packs, for example, they probably don't want me to mention them, but I will. And in Southwest Colorado would be a very good example of that. I mean, they are very dependent on the supply chain from Vietnam, and they probably are really worried today about what's going to happen, which a lot of people are. I mean, I think one of the things about the situation we find ourselves in is the degree to which we've now created huge uncertainty in our economy, and I'm worried that that is going to result in a lack of investment, capital investment. You mentioned some new investments that have been made in our economy, but I think that anybody who knows anything about the economy knows that uncertainty results in people freezing up, a paralysis, a lack of investment, which is going to make it hard for our economy and may actually provoke a recession. Could you comment on your concerns about that and how you're thinking about that? And I have one more question before I'm out of time.
So Senator, the best way to have certainty is to build in the United States, right? That's the best way to have certainty.
But that's going to take a long, long time. And what's going to happen in the meantime, do you think?
So, Senator, we have, I would say, dilly-dallied for years on this issue. We've done these, broad studies, which are interesting and helpful that we saw come out of the Biden administration.
Right.
But we have to act. I can't sit for 3 years and try to fine-tune something.
I hear you say that. But you could have made a different choice, which was to strategically target a geography, strategically target Beijing, strategically target certain industries where, all industries in America weren't affected at the same time. You didn't make that choice. I mean, you're in the midst of having trade negotiations with 90 different countries at the same time by your own testimony, all of whom can make their assessment, I assume, these are sophisticated people, about where the pressure points are on you, where the pressure points are going to come for us to not necessarily get the best deal because we're spread all over the globe negotiating every one of these agreements at the same time, rather than a more strategic approach, which would have had the benefit of giving us, I think, a much greater degree of certainty about where we were headed. Obviously, you made a different choice, and I'm just curious about how you think about your responsibility. How you think about that.
So I would note, and I think it's thoughtful to think about things in this way. If you look at the results of the reciprocal tariff, the Western Hemisphere generally is at the lowest tariff rate. If you look at where we have our largest problems with non-reciprocity and deficit countries, it's mostly in Asia. And so you do actually see pretty strategic outcome with respect to promoting production in the Western Hemisphere as opposed to where we have all this overproduction in Asia that's given rise to our current problems on trade.
I would just say in closing, Mr. Chairman, that's true. What the ambassador said is true, but it still doesn't, I still cannot fathom why we are treating Canada and Mexico, our largest trading partners, basically the same way we're treating Beijing. It doesn't make any sense to me. It makes no sense that we would do it all at the same time like that. And we're going to have to stay on it, which is why some of us have introduced legislation to make sure that Congress begins to take its appropriate role again in making these very important trade decisions. Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you. Senator Lankford.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Thank you for the work that you're doing. You've got a lot on your plate, and appreciate the focus right now on this. Let me come from a perspective of a lot of Oklahoma farmers and ranchers and manufacturing folks and retail folks, and quite frankly, folks that sell to retailers that are in Oklahoma. They've got several questions that they've actually sent to me pretty quickly, so I want to be able to bounce a few of those. The goal of this is to do more trade internationally, that the United States would be able to manufacture here or produce here and sell more internationally, and that we would have that opportunity to have increased market access. Is that correct?
So, Senator, I think that's accurate, because when we're trying to get down to deficit and have more production here, necessarily part of it is making sure we're not getting too many imports that are driven by unfair trade practices, but also promoting our exports overseas.
So then right now there's a lot of negotiations going on. There was a lot of questions for several days whether we're negotiating or not negotiating. I'm hearing from you pretty clearly today. We are open to negotiate. We're trying to be able to establish better trade agreements to be able to move forward. Do you have any timeline on certain countries or places that you have set internally to say we hope to have negotiations complete by this point? Obviously, negotiations can extend as long as they have to, but is there a timeline you're dealing with?
So the president has indicated that he's willing to negotiate with parties that want to pursue reciprocal trade with the United States. We don't have any particular timeline set on that because, as you pointed out, Senator, the outcome is more important than setting something artificially for us. What I can say is I'm moving as quickly as possible, and a lot of these countries are moving very quickly, and we're working on the weekends, we're working at night as folks want to engage on this. Now, I will say, I know you want to ask something, the trade deficit has been decades in the making, and it's not going to be solved overnight.
Right. Yeah, everyone understands that well, and everyone that I talk to is grateful that we're actually attacking the trade deficit issue and try to be able to bring down barriers to trade. They also want to get a timeline. Let me give you, for instance, I've got an Oklahoma company that several years ago spent millions of dollars to be able to move out of China. They moved into Vietnam for production because literally what they're producing, the parts were not created in America. So they were looking for other places to go. They spent all the money, spent all the time, shifted out of China, got to Vietnam, and established there. Now they're saying, we've got giant costs in Vietnam at this point. So they're going to have to renegotiate with every single retailer that they sell to, which is going to take a lot of time to be able to do it. What they're trying to be able to figure out is, do we hold on those negotiations and try to renegotiate with Walmart and Target and Costco and everybody else they're going to have to renegotiate with? Or do they press on with those negotiations now? If things are going to get resolved soon, they can pause. If they're not going to get resolved, they're going to have to renegotiate every contract again to try to figure out which way to go. So the time piece does matter to them.
Senator, I understand completely, and Vietnam is one of those countries that understands that it is, frankly, one of the major targets of this action because their trade surplus with us is so lopsided. I think it's every $15 they export to us, we send them $1, and they remain closed to our exports where we can be competitive, agriculture, et cetera. But they've come to the table with an offer, right? We didn't go out and say, please come talk to us. They beat down our door and they want to talk about it.
Good. I don't anticipate that we're ever going to have equal trade with Vietnam. We're a much larger economy than they are, but bringing down the trade barriers would be helpful so that they would accept American products to be sold there. I think that's beneficial, but most countries in the world are never going to buy as much as we're purchasing because we just purchase a lot more from there. Another issue has come up about garment manufacturing. Obviously, this is a challenge. We'll have different pieces that are bought from different countries. We don't have a lot of garment manufacturing here in the United States. For those garment manufacturers that are here and for others, some in Oklahoma, they're asking me about exclusions and exceptions and how this is going to be handled to say, we can't buy it in America. This is the only place that's actually manufacturing it. I know long-term, the hope is to be able to have a more diversified, but in the short term, they don't have another option. How do you plan to handle that?
Senator, the president has been clear with me and with others that he does not intend to have exclusions and exemptions, especially given the nature of the action. If you have Swiss cheese in the action, it can undermine the overall point, which is to get rid of the deficit, achieve reciprocity. To my point earlier to Mr. Bennett, the Western Hemisphere countries have a much lower tariff than many of the Asian countries. And I've heard from textile manufacturers for many years that they would love to have a situation where Western Hemisphere textile and garment manufacturing is more competitive, and maybe we're setting up the conditions for that.
So in the short term, there's no exemptions that are coming on it. So for companies that are currently buying from Asia at this point, whether it be for textiles, whatever it may be, the goal is to be able to push them out of Asia into the Western Hemisphere, or where do they need to go at this point?
Well, the president has been clear, again, that he's not doing exemptions or exceptions in the near term. My own sense is given the tariff differentials between Asia and Western Hemisphere, I think people can start making decisions based on that.
Senator Whitehouse.
Thanks, Ambassador Greer, for being here. Just to sort of frame our conversation, tell me what a negative externality is.
This is something you and I like to talk about.
Yes, we do.
This is a situation where you have a foreign country where perhaps they have actions such as poor environmental regimes or lax labor laws, and they don't bear the cost of that. Instead, they send their goods that are the product of these processes where they have lax regulatory regimes. They send it here, and we end up bearing this. They externalize these negative externalities to us, and we have to bear it, and our workers have to bear it, and we don't compete on a level playing field.
So two things are wrong with this. One, the customary negative externality is pollution. And to the extent, for instance, on an issue I've done a lot of work on in bipartisan fashion, plastic in our oceans. Now it's in our drinking water, it's in breast milk. I mean, we've really gone down a very weird pathway with respect to plastics. If China, for instance, is responsible for dumping 60 or 70% of the plastics into the Pacific, then that's a harm to us, correct?
Yes, I agree.
Because it's a commons, the ocean, and we suffer from that. And then if the Chinese company is exporting their goods to the U.S. and that Chinese company has a lower cost for its product because it doesn't have proper pollution control with respect to plastic, and the U.S. company does, then that's an unfair trade imbalance, correct?
Yes, I agree with that.
So two things are wrong when we get into this situation of foreign countries allowing pollution that our companies pay to prevent.
That's right.
And that's an appropriate place for tariffs to be deployed to offset that trade imbalance and help protect the commons from this particular tragedy, correct?
I think trade action can be appropriate, and when the president announced his reciprocal tariff regime last Wednesday, he specifically referred to pollution by other countries in his speech. You may not have listened to it, but you may want to go back and listen to that part, because that's very true, and I agree with you.
Well, it might be the only place in which the administration shows the slightest interest in pollution, so good for that. The issue of plastics is, I think, a pretty significant one. Again, there's been a lot of bipartisan interest. I even went up to the Oval Office during Trump 1 to have one of my bills signed by the president, and he gave a very animated riff on Asian countries polluting our beautiful oceans and how it comes ashore very often in Alaska by the ton along their beaches. So I hope this is an area we can continue to work together. And in particular, I hope that you'll sit down with me and Senator Cassidy on legislation that we are working on. Will you give us that meeting?
Senator, I'll take any meeting with you that you would like to talk about this issue. And I'd like to also let you.
We'll sit down with Senator Cassidy's team and have a conversation there. The other thing I wanted to flag for you is that you pretty well successfully deflected all of Senator Bennett's questions about what the immediate impact looks like in the short-term pain for the long-term gain. I just want to flag for you one issue that is very important to me. Rhode Island is a small business state, right? We don't have a whole lot of big mega corporations there who can balance things and move things around. Canada is our largest trading partner. We have companies who fill an important niche in the global supply chain, and particularly in American companies' supply chains, because they get something from Canada, or let's say China, could be, but Canada's our major trading partner, and they process that thing, and then they put it into the supply chain for the larger corporate entities. That's their business. That's all they've got. So if we're not looking out for these small businesses that are actually going to have to lock their doors and close the shutters and fire their employees and go out of business, I think you've missed a huge hole in the problem that these tariffs have created. If all you're listening to is the big mega corporations who can move things around the world and have the resources to dodge these effects, you're not getting the straight story. I think in every one of our states, there are going to be small businesses that occupy a niche in which trade is an important factor and that are going to go bust because of these tariffs. And I urge you to look out for those businesses because I don't think they're getting their voices heard at all.
So, Senator, I've talked to you about this. I've talked to Senator Hassan about this and others. One thing I asked my team to do last week was to convene a meeting of I have a trade advisory council for small business. I've asked them to convene that meeting. I've connected with the Small Business Administration. They have an international trade desk there. I've talked to I have an office that also deals with small business because I do want to hear it. I think it's important that we hear it because they don't have the same voices in Washington. I will say right now, Canada and Mexico, things coming from Canada and Mexico that comply with the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement come in duty-free. They continue to do so if they follow the rules. If they don't follow the rules and are trying to put in Chinese stuff, that's going to be tariffed. But if they follow the rules, they're going to be getting the duty-free treatment they're due.
Well, a small business that has gone broke is not very amenable to a meeting. They don't exist any longer.
Senator Hassan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Ranking Member. Good morning, Ambassador Greer. Thank you for being here. Before I start with a couple of additional questions about the impact of these tariffs. I want to associate myself with Senator Whitehouse's comments just now about the impact on our small businesses, particularly those who are critical parts of supply chains for some of our larger corporations in the country. As you know, Canada is our biggest trading partner too, and we are already seeing the impact of these tariffs with our small businesses, especially in our tourism industry, which is being decimated because Canadians are not coming down to New Hampshire the way they usually do. Let me ask you about a couple of other things. President Trump's tariffs have made almost everything that families buy more expensive. The president imposed a 10% national sales tax on all imports into our country and an even higher sales tax on imports from more than 50 countries, including our allies like Canada. This is the largest tax increase in over half a century, and it's going to cost the average American family $3,800 a year. Their morning cup of coffee will cost more, so will new shoes for their kids, and so will fresh fruit. So my question to you, Ambassador, is how much revenue from the president's national sales tax will be used to give tax breaks to billionaires?
So, Senator, as you know, any kind of tariff revenue that comes in to the United States government, it goes to the Treasury, and Congress will decide what happens to that money. Obviously, the president wants to have a very competitive tax policy that's good for everybody. That was part of why he had such a successful economy in the first term, is he married trade action with good tax policy to have $7,000 an increase in real wages over that time.
Well,
That's
let's be really clear. The president, besides the contradictions in the way he talks about the purpose of his tariffs, the president's made very clear that he sees tariffs as a way of increasing revenue. At the same time, he's working with the majority in Congress to give additional tax breaks to the wealthiest people in the country at the expense of working people who are going to be paying more for everyday goods they absolutely have to pay, goods they were hoping were going to cost less, given the president's campaign promises. But of course, he isn't keeping to those campaign promises as prices continue to go up. Now, the president's national sales tax is increasing prices for families. It's also causing huge losses in Americans' retirement savings. Ambassador Greer, would the administration reverse course if the president's tariffs led to 10% inflation?
Senator, the president is fixed in his purpose. This trade deficit and the offshoring and loss of manufacturing jobs is something that's persisted for too long, and it's dangerous.
I understand your justification for the policy, even though there are some very contradictory justifications coming out of the administration. But my question is, what's the inflation rate where you guys would reverse course? 10% inflation that I just asked you about, that is higher inflation than we saw at the peak of the COVID economic crisis. But you aren't going to say here today that you would reverse course even if you created inflation as high as we had at the peak of the COVID economic crisis.
I think the most serious inflation we saw was during the Biden administration. When we did tariffs in the first term, inflation went down. I just don't. It's not going to be a one-to-one. Inflation about how much money you're putting into the supply.
Well, let's just be really clear that the Trump administration is here today to say that even if inflation hits Americans' pocketbooks at 10% because of these tariffs, then the Trump administration is still going to go charging ahead. So, Ambassador, would the administration reverse course if the president's tariffs caused a 50% stock market crash, which would hurt Americans' retirement savings even more than they've been hurt in the last 10 days or so?
Senator, the fundamentals of the economy are so strong. We had 228,000 jobs last month. We have 9,000 additional manufacturing jobs from the month before.
Your answer is even if the stock market crashes 50%, which is how much the stock market crashed in the Great Recession, you're not going to say here today that you would reverse course even if you crash the stock market and harm retirement savings as drastically as happened during the Great Recession in 2007.
Senator, your hypotheticals are not consistent with the history we have seen with the use of tariffs.
My hypotheticals are based on the fact that a lot of Americans are looking at their 401ks today and wondering how much of a lifestyle change they are going to have, or whether they're going to be able to retire when they plan to, because of the recklessness and haphazard nature of the Trump administration's imposition of tariffs. Nothing was thought out about this. This has been a haphazard, incompetent effort, and it's showing. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Senator Cassidy.
Hi, Mr. Greer. Thank you for being here. When I speak to my rice people and my shrimp people back home, they say that the tariff barriers and the subsidies by other countries for those products are so much that it is putting some of our shrimpers and some of our rice people either out of business or in incredible financial binds. And so the fact that the president is attempting to address these as well as the non-tariff trade barriers is incredibly important. Let me first say that. But I also hear from my producers that the mean tariff being selected to apply to a country may not account that for rice, for example, the tariff is much higher for that particular product, and that it is not adequate to address that which is taking place. Any thoughts on that, and how can we have something more particular for products which are really over tariffed?
Yes, thank you, and I appreciate that concern, and the tariff rate applied to many of these countries again was a countrywide rate. It wasn't product specific. My sense is if countries come to us and they expect to have some kind of a different plan, they will need to change these things, right? And they will have specific products, specific barriers that they would have to address. Right, or else, you know, the president, again, he's fixed his purpose. He wants to see production back here. He wants to see our agriculture producers doing well. And these countries just have to have reciprocal trade with us. And that means taking care of the types of barriers and tariff rates you're talking about.
So it sounds like you, one of the things I think they want to know is that since shrimp might be a relatively small part of trades with some of these countries, that the interests of, for example, shrimp will not be sacrificed in part of a greater whole.
No, I think, and I saw a really interesting article today in the New York Times on shrimp. You may have seen that, where the tariffs have actually given a bit of a lifeline to these shrimpers. And I think that, you know, if there's going to be any kind of change to any of this, and I'm not going to prejudge that, we have to make sure that our industries are protected adequately, so we don't go backwards with the deficit.
Let me ask, in the President's America First trading policy, there's several sections relating to free trade agreements and how they will be evaluated. Senator Bennett and I are working on an America's Act, which would be a hemispheric trade policy, which would have several purposes. One, to strengthen those ties. Secondly, to keep the Chinese from making the incursions that they are absolutely making throughout the hemisphere. Some are calling the Caribbean a Chinese lake. And so this would allow us to push back upon that. Can you share anything regarding the analyses of the free trade agreements we have within our hemisphere, and then specifically on countries like Argentina who would like an FTA with our country?
Certainly. I would say that we are first and foremost focused on addressing this emergency and the reciprocal tariff action and implementing it appropriately. With respect to relations in the hemisphere, any kind of trade arrangements with these trading partners, I think, need to be coupled with strong rules about third countries. What I don't want is a situation where these countries are using, their export platforms to incorporate content and goods from, China or other Asian countries, where we have a real issue with our deficit and offshoring of manufacturing. I would expect any kind of changes to these arrangements to be accompanied by changes in rules of origin to ensure that the United States and U.S. workers are really benefiting from these agreements.
So nothing from an FTA in general, but the specific of where it's being used to circumvent the intent of the FTA is the concern of the administration.
Yes, that's certainly a huge concern. And again, the president wants to see factories back here. The most certain way to not have a tariff is to build your factory in the United States. If people want to use other countries and insist on that, then we want to make sure that they're not using that to arbitrage for higher tariff jurisdictions to use them as an unfair export platform.
Let me ask you this. Louisiana has some of the largest ports in the nation by tonnage. And all the commodities going from the Midwest flow through my state going out to the world. Earlier, USTR proposed imposing like $1 million for every vessel built in China. And I'm told that if the Koreans have a fleet of 50 and 5 of the ships are built in China, then the $1 million would apply to all 50, not just to the ships that are built in China. Now, that would clearly impact a ship coming to the United States to offload. if you will, impact my ports and the ability of our goods throughout the nation to move through the Mississippi. Is USTR going to hang by that or considering modifying that? Can you kind of give us any idea about that?
So to address the lack of shipbuilding in the United States, USTR's proposed actions are just those. They're proposed actions. They're a series of potential remedies that could be used to incentivize shipbuilding in the U.S. They're not all going to be implemented. They're not all going to be stacked. We've asked for a lot of input, and we've had hearing on that. We've collected comments. We've reviewed it. I've met personally with certain stakeholders during that time period, and I think the president will look very carefully to make sure that we have the right amount of time and the right incentives to create shipbuilding here without impacting our commodity exports.
Okay, thank you. I yield.
Senator Cortez Masto.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ambassador, as USTR's Chief of Staff in the first Trump administration, you oversaw the negotiation of the U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement, the USMCA, and the renegotiation of the Korea-U.S. Free Trade Agreement, the KORUS. President Trump signed both of these agreements. He called the USMCA a colossal victory, and KORUS a historic milestone. And yet, with President Trump's new blanket tariffs, he is ripping up these agreements with our allies that we negotiated with. Why would any country want to do business with us, much less negotiate a trade deal, if we don't even honor our ongoing agreements?
So, Senator, we are the consumer of last resort. These countries have to sell here. They have, many of them, especially in Asia, have built their entire economies around exporting to us. They're very dependent on it, and that's part of why we have this huge trade deficit. With USMCA, those parties continue to enjoy duty-free treatment for many of the products that continue to comply with the rules that were set out 5 years ago. There's a big concern, Senator, that we did not have adequate other protections to stop the flow, particularly of like autos into the United States.
But there was a process for you to renegotiate that agreement this year. We talked about that in my office. Isn't that correct?
That's correct.
And it wasn't to do these blanket tariffs, correct?
What we have to address is an emergency, Senator.
That's true. And you should be honest. At least as you sit here, as you were in my office, be intellectually honest. Now, let me just ask this, because this is also true. And I so appreciate my Senator Langford asking this. Time matters. How long did it take to negotiate that agreement, the USMCA, that you were part of?
We did it at breakneck speed. We did it in about 2 years.
2 years. And now you're telling us you have nearly 50 countries coming to you, approaching you to enter in a negotiation. And you think that you can do that overnight?
India.
Man, you're pretty superhuman here, if that's the case. So let's be realistic. That's all we're asking. Common sense and realism here, Ambassador, as you sit here before us. And let me talk about something else that is really important for my state, and I think this entire country, because this administration is forgetting that we have $1 billion economy when it comes to tourism into the United States. People know Las Vegas. My state is Nevada. We rely on tourism to our state, and now we're seeing an impact because of these tariffs, not just from Canada, but I am hearing from so many that are in the tourism and kind of leisure industry. We are seeing impacts because now this $1 billion industry of international tourism is having an impact on our economy. And this is a service industry. Let me just say this. I'm kind of offended by your testimony today that says we must accept self-inflicted economic pain, and I quote you by saying, to become an economy based on producing real goods and services. What does that mean? What does that mean to my service industry and every service industry across this country that relies on tourism and travel? That is the backbone, really, of part of our $1 billion economy. What do I tell them? That they just have to suck it up? That they're not really part of this real services? That you have another idea for the jobs that they should engage in? What do I tell them?
Oh, Senator, of course those are real services.
Fascism always demands a public enemy. You see, in order to erode our civil rights, undermine the rule of law, and desensitize us, their acts of dehumanization, authoritarians create a public enemy. In this moment, they've decided that immigrants will be that scapegoat. Through lies and scapegoating, the Trump administration has tried to make immigrants the big, major public enemy. They've tried to convince us that the problem isn't their abuses of power, that the problem isn't the influence of dark money in our politics, that the problem isn't them and these multinational corporations and the ways that they continue to dehumanize people. It's immigrants. And at the end of last week, a number of us went back to the border. This time I was in the Tijuana-San Diego border. I saw children facing immigration processing without lawyers. I saw 12-year-old children in handcuffs. A basic right of being able to have representation for children was denied by Noam and Trump. I saw a woman run to the glass of the cell she was being detained in, along with other women, begging for help. I saw people and children who had just came through, wanting to color, to try to find some stability as they attempt to seek asylum in a country that this precise moment is denying them from that refuge. I heard officers admit that people are dying trying to get through the barbed wire that Noam and Trump have put in to deter people from seeking asylum. And it is unconscionable to us that in their short time in office, the Trump administration and Noam have abused the power of the Department of Homeland Security to pursue a campaign of persecution, of mass incarceration, and deportation. Day after day after day, Noam disregards the authority of Congress. She disregards the laws of the land and the constitutional rights of residents, the courts, due process, and every check and balance that protects us from their fascist authoritarian agenda. No one has been spared from their abusive authoritarian assault. Not children with cancer, not organ donors, not student activists, not professors, not green card holders, not asylees, not even DACA recipients, not even veterans. The administration, through Noam's actions, has detained a Puerto Rican veteran in New Jersey. They've illegally deported Kilmer Abrego Garcia due to what they call an administrative error. How many administrative errors after administrative errors will this administration continue to do? They've sent hairdressers and soccer players to offshore detention centers like SICAR in El Salvador. They've weaponized immigration enforcement against activists and dissenting voices like legal permanent resident Mahmoud Khalil, international student Rumeska Osterk, and labor rights organizer Alfredo Lelo Juarez. They continue to do this because they think they can get away with it. And they are sending women to an all-men's prison in El Salvador, thinking that they can get away with it. These are just some of the cases that actually have made the headlines. But you and I both know that what they're doing is creating fear and persecution around the country and, frankly, around the world. Noam has wasted millions of taxpayer dollars in furthering the vilification of immigrants, from a $200 million anti-immigrant ad campaign to a $45 million illegal contract to detain people in offshore prisons, to more than $300 million to militarize and end parole and due process at our borders. And as a member of Homeland Security, I take my obligation as a member very seriously. I have written letters after letters after letters making congressional requests that the secretary come before the oversight body of the agency. I have publicly demanded the secretary come to the committee, but those calls continue to go unanswered. And friends, I believe in due process. I believe in the rule of law and in the Constitution. I believe in our shared humanity and human rights, in our community safety. I believe in our democracy despite of the fact that Secretary Noem, Donald Trump, and Elon Musk are doing everything to destroy it. And I believe in checks and balances, and certainly in accountability. I believe honoring those laws, processes, values, and commitments make us safer, and undermining them make us all less safe. And because I believe in these things, I cannot let Noem continue to violate our rights, undermine due process, and misuse our resources. It is why on this morning I stand here with community, demanding that Kristi Noem resign from her position as the Secretary of Homeland Security. The time is up. It is time for Secretary Noem to step down. And it is time for us to have a secretary that respects law, due process, but that is not Kristi Noem. And it is why, as a member of Homeland Security, I publicly demand that she step down, and she step down now. With me today are a number of advocates and also other members of Congress who understand how critical this moment is today. And it is why it is my honor to present to you one of my colleagues, a mentor, a champion, and a mover for justice, Congresswoman Nydia Velázquez.
Thank you, Congresswoman Ramirez, for calling us together at such a critical moment. Let us talk about what we have seen in just few months of this new Trump administration. Because anyone who claims to care about the Constitution should be terrified. Immigrants with no criminal record have been disappeared into Setco mega prison in El Salvador. No hearing, no notice, just gone. DHS has blamed so-called administrative errors to justify deportation without due process. They have picked up foreign students off the street and disappeared them simply for speaking out against U.S. foreign policy. And this administration has gone so far as to attempt to destroy our asylum system as we know it. Trump said he was only coming after criminals, but that was a lie. He is coming after all immigrants, period. And even said about sending U.S. citizens to El Salvador. Think about that. Think about that. It could happen to any one of us. The Trump administration is using the machinery of government to punish and silence. Every day, they are chipping away at our most basic rights. It is not just that they don't care about due process. They seem to take pride in ignoring it. From day one, DHS has acted like the law doesn't apply to them. It is time for that to end. We need accountability from every participant in the mass deportation campaign. That is why Congresswoman Ramirez and I sent a letter today to Secretary of State Marco Rubio, demanding answers about transfer from the U.S. to Setco, because we know this will not stop with immigrants, as Trump himself proved when he floated the idea of sending U.S. citizens to El Salvador the other day. Secretary Kristi Noem must come before Congress. She must answer for the chaos and cruelty we are seeing on her watch and explain why her agency is treating due process like an inconvenience. The American people deserve answers, and we will not stop until we get them. Estamos aquí para denunciar el trato que están recibiendo personas indocumentadas que han sido indocumentadas y personas con estatus legal aquí en los Estados Unidos, sin tener un proceso justo de venir ante un juez y dar explicaciones y presentar sus argumentos. Hoy, el presidente Donald Trump, mientras estaba haciendo campaña, él mintió al público americano cuando dijo, y muchos latinos le creyeron, sobre todo hombres latinos, de que se iban a enviar a deportar los criminales. Bueno, ustedes están siendo testigos de que no solamente están enviando criminales, pero aún así todo el mundo tiene derecho a un proceso judicial justo. Los invito a ustedes para que se expresen en rechazar las actitudes y las decisiones de esta administración Donald Trump. Estamos con ustedes y seguiremos insistiendo en que se respeten los derechos y que todo el mundo está cubierto bajo la Constitución. Gracias.
With that, I'd like to introduce to you another one of our colleagues here today, Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib from Michigan.
Thank you so much to our incredible women. If I ever get detained, these are the women I want to come save me. You know, even in a hindrance or a touch of the due process, I don't think people realize, because they're like, oh, it's not me. But any kind of watering down, making exceptions of who gets due process and who doesn't is actually deteriorating your rights, our rights. And so it's very important. You know, the Trump administration's attack on immigrants in our country, it is incredibly cruel and disgusting. Every single day, it gets more and more shameful. They are kidnapping people, sending them to prison camps in El Salvador, famous for torture and forced labor. Family members and neighbors, many of which call our offices suddenly, again, saying we're not sure, they're late, fearful, living in complete fear that somebody in their family is next. But people getting kidnapped, abducted, disappearing to a prison in a country that many of them have absolutely no connection with. No due process, no charges, no trial, just cruelty and targeting and racial profiling. We see it because they're also stopping Americans who may look like us and trying to, again, target them and, again, try to detain them. You know, I think of Kilmar Garcia, who's stolen from his wife and family, including their 5-year-old child, who's autistic and nonverbal. You know, Kilmar's wife has spoken about how distressed their son has been since their father was taken away, finding his dad's shirts and smelling them because he misses them. You know, we're missing the humanity of what our country is doing. You know, the cruelty is the point with this administration. You know, the Trump folks is using official government social media accounts. It's so, I mean, these are things that in 10 years, people are going to look back and say, you guys let that happen? Yeah. So my colleagues need to wake up and understand. People are going to look back and say, you let the White House post these unbelievable, disgusting, and shameful and lawless posts like this. This is cruelty. It's dehumanizing. It's degrading. The fact that many of families are watching and seeing if they see their loved ones among the crowd. The videos of immigrants in chains and inhumane conditions, they take sick pleasure in the violent human rights abuses committed against them. Again, I as an American, I'm ashamed. I'm ashamed that our country is moving in this direction. The attacks on immigrants is an attack on all of us. This is openly fascist behavior rooted in white nationalism. Trump has himself, listen to him. Trump himself said that he would love to send U.S. citizens to prison camps, that he's all for it, quote, all for it. They are targeting disappearing students for their First Amendment speech, for protesting genocide, like Mahmoud, like Rasmiya, like Badar. All of these people shredding our constitutional rights to free speech and due process. They are targeting, detaining labor leaders like United Farm Worker organizer Alfredo Juarez. They are sending immigrants to detention facilities in Guantanamo, a global symbol of torture, racism, and dehumanization. They are kidnapping, using chains, forced labor, a reminder of the worst chapters of our history. We cannot allow this to continue. Just again, in my own district, a resident, American lawyer, getting detained at the airport, his cell phone confiscated, detained for over an hour, all because he represents students, encampment students. Again, the targeting is real and it's happening. Yes, they might be starting for things that may divide our country around immigration and maybe the issue around what's happening in Gaza. But trust me, it will be the other issues like unionization. It will be other issues like access to abortion care. This is an attack on all of us. They will start here and they will lead to other issues that they disagree with. So again, we have to understand a future with no border walls, no Guantanamo, no family separation, no deportations, and with human rights, safety, and human dignity for all people, no matter where they were born, who you are, or the color of your skin. It is important, again, to restore this. I remind folks that they always start with people like us. They end up, again, targeting community folks that never ever thought they would be sent, again, to places like this. But when they start with just some of us and we are silent, it leads them to come to target all of us. And again, this is the time to speak up. I really cannot commend Congresswoman Ramirez enough. And of course, my sister, Nydia Velazquez, in speaking up. This is a moment, again, no matter our backgrounds, no matter the makeup of our communities, our districts, this is a time to come together and say, look, not on our watch will we allow this to happen. And again, any deterioration to due process is a deterioration to all of us. So again, thank you so much. And again, your leadership is so important. Thank you.
Thank you. This work in Congress, we often say it's about legislating using oversight authority. It is about the courts and the litigation process, and it is about the community and the mobilizing work that needs to be done. Well, today with us, we have organizations that have been holding the line, that have been protecting due process, that have continued to talk about the importance of preserving our First Amendment rights. And today with us, we have Jesse Frensblau, the Senior Policy Analyst with the National Immigration Justice. Let's give him a warm welcome. Thank you. Jesse.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman Delegate Ramirez. It's such an honor to be here with these brave members of Congress, Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib and Nydia Velazquez, for standing up today. I'm really honored to be here. I'm a Senior Policy Analyst with the National Immigrant Justice Center, which for 4 decades has worked to ensure human rights protections and access to justice for immigrants, refugees, and asylum seekers. And headquartered in Chicago, the National Immigrant Justice Center provides legal services through its staff and pro bono network to over 11,000 people a year. And the National Immigrant Justice Center has really witnessed firsthand the long-lasting traumatic impact of the harsh enforcement machine, which has grown astronomically over the years, costing billions in taxpayer dollars and destroying lives. The U.S. operates the largest immigration detention machine in the world. It spends more public funds on immigration enforcement than ever before. This is a relatively new phenomenon, and it stemmed from this dramatic shift in resources towards racialized policing, surveillance of immigrant communities, and intensified border militarization. ICE's overall budget has grown from $3.4 billion in 2004 to nearly $10 billion annually today. And CBP's budget has grown over that same time from around $5 billion to $16 billion. And so the increased funding for the enforcement and this buildup of this infrastructure for mass detention and sweeping targeted arrests and large-scale removals is what we are facing today. And oversight is of course essential. Our government officials must be held accountable for the misuse of federal funds and the evisceration of due process and other constitutional protections that we're seeing today. Our courts and Congress are on the front lines of the defense for basic humanity and to ensure that public funds are going towards communities in need, not towards ICE raids and more ICE jails. Right. NIJC is fighting for immigrant communities, including those who are swept up in warrantless arrests by ICE in Chicago in the first week of the Trump administration, and will continue to fight this administration's harmful policies. NIJC has uncovered ICE arrests and assaults targeting U.S. citizens, abductions of business owners, targeting domestic violence survivors, and will continue to fight these cruel tactics in Congress and in the streets. And we're so grateful for members of Congress who are speaking out and opposing legislative efforts to advance the Trump White House agenda, including the funding for legislation that risks access to basic services for kids, to provide tax loopholes for Trump's billionaire cabinet and donor class. NIJC is incredibly grateful for the champions in Congress demanding accountability and oversight for agencies responsible for such grave abuses, and those who keep showing up to fight for justice for our immigrant communities. Thank you. And now, next will be Eric Eckenberry, the Government Relations Director with Win Without War.
Thank you so much, and thank you, Congresswoman Ramirez, for bringing us together today. I'm Eric Eichenberry, work for Win Without War, a progressive peace organization representing hundreds of thousands of people across the United States. And when the vast majority of people in the United States think about what keeps us safe, we think about a roof over our heads, access to health care, good food, clean water, and communities where we can move around safely, confident that we'll be free from harm and fraud. But this administration isn't offering us real security. Instead, the only things this administration has to offer, whether it's President Trump or DHS Secretary Noem, is masked government agents abducting people in broad daylight, bone-deep cuts to public health and infrastructure, a farcical and wasteful deployment of our military to our borders, and unlawfully invoking a wartime code from 1798 to send dozens and dozens of immigrants with no criminal record to a mega prison abroad. And all DHS Secretary Noem has time for, it seems, is to film paranoid and disturbing propaganda videos for this paranoid and disturbed White House. We can all find a better use for her time. Let's get her down here before members of Congress representing the exact constituencies she's terrorizing, and have her explain to the public, and not just her narrow echo chamber, why Kilma Abrego Garcia, Andre Hernandez Romero, Mahmoud Khalil, Rumeysa Ozturk, and a growing list of human beings are languishing in prisons instead of freely living their lives with friends and loved ones. We have questions, and her only answers can possibly be to free them all and to stop these blatant and reprehensible abuses. Thank you. Thank you. I'd love to welcome Satari Gandhari, the Advocacy Director of Detention Watch Network.
We cannot overstate how dire this moment is. Trump's expansion of the detention and deportation system is unprecedented, and his use of the system to target those who criticize the policies of this government is an inflection point in the rising tide of authoritarianism. The Trump administration is dredging up some of the darkest moments in our history to consolidate power, suppress dissent, and enact a cruel agenda. It cannot be ignored that immigration detention is a key component of Trump's plans to target immigrant communities and to suppress political opposition. For decades, directly impacted people, government oversight agencies, media outlets, and advocates have documented inhumane conditions, mistreatment, and abuse at the immigration detention centers across the country. We have been sounding the alarm for years that immigration detention is wholly unnecessary, rife with systemic abuse, and completely arbitrary. This administration has further weaponized the system to target not just immigrant communities and activists, but any political opposition, to silence people and to spread fear in our communities. If fully realized, Trump's multi-layered detention expansion plan will triple the system that has been proven again and again to be inherently inhumane and even deadly. Over the last weeks, we are increasingly hearing distressing reports about how conditions continue to deteriorate. And there have been at least 3 deaths in ICE custody since the inauguration alone. On top of expanding the immigration detention system domestically, Trump has shockingly partnered with the government of El Salvador to indefinitely imprison people unjustly deported from the U.S. in one of El Salvador's most notorious and abusive mega prisons. The administration is indiscriminately deporting people without even a semblance of due process, punishing and terrorizing communities for the sake of horrific photo ops and as a propaganda tool. But let's be clear. These are the actions of an authoritarian regime attempting to maintain power by dividing us, vilifying and attacking some groups while pandering to others. And in the end, the only winners will be the Trump administration and his billionaire allies. We won't accept this outcome, and we cannot afford for our elected leaders to remain silent. That's why I am so grateful to the Congresswoman today. But we call on all our elected leaders. They can't be immobile or worse, complicit in this. People's lives are in jeopardy, and Congress has choices too. Instead of continuing to bankroll Trump's cruelty and giving him the power to act with impunity, Congress must reject funding for detention and deportation and instead invest in critical programs that support everyone's well-being and respond to the real needs of the American public while vigorously defending the rights of those who are politically targeted, including immigrants who are valued and vital members of our community. Thank you. Yes, and I have the pleasure of introducing my colleague, Noreen Shah, Director of Government Affairs at the ACLU.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Noreen Shah. I'm Director of Government Affairs for Immigration at the ACLU. In the last month, the Trump administration has sent scores of men to a prison in El Salvador known for nightmarish conditions. It's one of the most brutal prisons in the world. It's said that the only way to exit is through a coffin. It's said that those who enter will never see the sun again. We have seen now, because of the reporting of 60 Minutes and the photos from a journalist who entered, we've seen the images of this prison. They're images of despair, and there are images of indifference, and images of cruelty, and images even of glee on the part of this administration and its supporters who delight in the suffering of human beings they do not know. This is a catastrophic moral horror to send people, to spend our taxpayer dollars to send people to a nightmare and to close the door and to turn our backs and say, it may have been an administrative error, but there's nothing that we can do. Instead of denying what is happening, our government is celebrating it. So let's stop and say the names. Let's say the name of one of these individuals, Jose Hernandez Romero. He is a gay makeup artist. He loved his parents. He loves his parents. He has tattoos honoring them on his body. And according to 60 Minutes, when he was there, he cried out for his parents. He prayed. He shouted for his mother. And yet our government turns our back on him. I'm here on behalf of the ACLU. Last night, the Supreme Court vacated the TRO, the order, in our case, filed with Democracy Forward. But it underlined that people sent to El Salvador under the Alien Enemies Act must be given notice. They must be given judicial review. That's an important victory. We are filing habeas suits as of last night and this morning, and we will keep fighting. We will keep fighting because this moment of horror is one that cannot go unanswered. It must be checked. We applaud the leadership of Congresswoman Ramirez and of her colleagues who are calling out with disgust, with righteous disgust, what is happening in this moment, and we will continue to fight alongside them and many others around the country. Thank you so much. And I'm going to introduce now Yumna Rizvi, the Senior Policy Analyst at the Center for Victims of Torture.
Thank you, Representative Ramirez, for your leadership and for taking a stand against the abuse of power we're addressing today. I'm Yumna Rizvi with the Center for Victims of Torture, where we extend healing care to asylum seekers and refugees, all of whom are either survivors of torture or war trauma. And for 23 years, we've been calling for the closure of the Guantanamo Bay detention facility and for accountability of U.S. torture. Guantanamo Bay has long been synonymous with injustice, torture, and Islamophobia. It is a glaring example of the U.S. government's disregard for due process and willingness to hold people indefinitely without charge. It represents one of the darkest chapters of U.S. history. The Trump administration's decision to now hold immigrants, including asylum seekers and refugees, in a facility notorious for human rights violations is morally reprehensible, unprecedented, and unlawful. Perversely, the administration is playing up Guantanamo's legacy as a haven for torture and injustice to scare immigrants and vilify them to the broader public. Let's be clear, seeking refuge is not a crime, and migrants should never be treated as criminals. To date, the administration has wasted close to $40 million of taxpayer money for this performance. Secretary Noem must answer for setting up hundreds of tents that have never been used, shuffling people around like cargo, and holding them in inhumane conditions. There has been no transparency, no accountability, and no regard for human dignity. This is more than mismanagement. It is performative cruelty. The military detention facility at Guantanamo should have been closed years ago. It is unacceptable that not only is it still operational, but that it is being repurposed for yet another generation of unjust detention. And with that, I have the privilege of handing it back to the Congresswoman.
Thank you so much. Thank you. A catastrophic, horrific moment is what we're living. Imagine your son having a tattoo with your name on it. And then all of a sudden he is detained, he's abducted, and he is sent to a maximum security prison camp in El Salvador. And he is put in this position as they're being beat, as their head is being shaved. And then you have a secretary who not just celebrates the horrors that your child is living, she stands in front of them and she happily talks about how she will do this to the next child, to the next person that dares to dissent in a moment such as this. That she's okay with abducting young people from their schools. That she's okay with deporting veterans. That she's okay to send people to El Salvador, to Guantanamo Bay, women who are coming to this country fleeing the worst of the worst persecutions in Asia or in Africa or in other parts of the world, that they'll send them to Colombia or Panama with no due process. Imagine members of Congress asking for the secretary that is getting paid by your tax dollars to come before our committee and answer questions. And those calls to go unanswered repeatedly because she's too busy going on her selfie videos, causing torture, torment, and fear across the world. Well, Secretary Noem, enough is enough. What you are doing is unconscionable, is illegal, and it is criminal. The entire administration is testing us. They are asking, how much can we get away with? How far can we go? Well, this morning we say enough is enough. It hasn't even been 100 days, but the limit has been exceeded. And it is why we say enough of the violations of our rights, enough disregarding our courts, enough of the wannabe dictators, enough of the administrative errors, enough of the overreach, just enough. There is no end to how their abuse and how far their abuse will go. But I'm going to be honest with you. The trauma, the fear, the experiences of Americans, of those seeking asylum. You cannot reverse the trauma and pain that this administration is causing on an entire nation. You can't just administratively change things. You certainly must return these people back to where they belong, back home, here. But you can't take away the trauma and impact that has already been incurred. And it is why today I courageously stand before the halls of Congress in front of the United States Capitol, calling for Secretary Noem to resign immediately. Because we understand that enough is enough. Because we understand that standing up to fascism is our moral responsibility of this moment. With that, we end our press conference. Are there any questions?
Were you able to comment on the tariffs reports we got yesterday, one on the Alien Enemies Act, the other in the case of the Maryland ban, and how that's affecting the situation?
Yeah, I'm going to ask you to answer a little bit of that, and then I'll answer it. Go ahead. Go ahead, Noreen.
Yes. Thanks so much. The ACLU brought the lawsuit with Democracy Forward on the Alien Enemies Act, and while we're concerned, of course, about the temporary restraining order being vacated, what we did see the Supreme Court do was underline that those who are subject to the Alien Enemies Act have a right to notice, and there must be judicial review, and that's an important victory. That's not our lawsuit, so I'll defer.
Yeah. In the Maryland case, you mean the father that was sent to Salvador? I mean, I think it's pretty ridiculous. I mean, you've heard the court say he needs to be returned immediately, and they have until yesterday to have returned him. But the reality is that he should never have been sent. And the idea that there isn't due process is exactly why you're seeing these deportations, these abductions happen. I think it's really important to state that that has created really dangerous precedent, and it is exactly why we think it's so important that we understand that it's not just returning people back home, it's making sure that this doesn't happen again. I'll give you another quick example. The coercing people into forced self-deportation. There are young people, these 12-year-olds that are right now in custody. They are being told that they don't have counsel anymore, and therefore they can go ahead and sign the deportation. That is a violation of due process, and that's exactly why we expect the courts to be able to continue to rule on due process. Thank you. With that, we end the press conference. Thank you, folks. Thank you for holding.
Well, Senator, you can certainly always talk to me, but
are you at the tip of the spear?
Well, I'm at the tip of the spear for certainly.
Did you propose the alla prima approach?
So, first of all, I would push back, Senator, just a little bit on this. For now, we've excluded pharmaceuticals and semiconductors to take a different kind of approach.
So let's get
and we've excluded
question.
USMC.
Section 232 and 301. We know particularly Section 232 is still on aluminum. Section 301 is Chinese imports, where there's no other provider. I overheard you say that maybe, or I thought I heard you say in response to another question, that for the near term there won't be any exclusions. Is that true of China, where they have said the U.S. is unilaterally bullying and completely groundless and they're going to fight to the end? Are the 232 and 301 tariffs exclusions on the shelves until we get to a reasonable agreement with China? I'm just trying to answer a question that I have several people in North Carolina asking.
So the president, again, is the final decision maker on all of these things, and he has directed that there not be exclusions or
There
exemptions.
will not be any exclusions on steel, aluminum, or any products that are only manufactured in China for the foreseeable future until China determines what the end is, because they said they're going to fight to the end. Again, I'm just trying to communicate questions that I've asked, so there will be no exclusions. Yes. I won't waste your time asking for them. That's the main reason I wanted to ask the question. So again, I'm just trying to get my head around the logic of an alla prima approach, and I'm waiting to be, I'm waiting to see it be successful. But it just seems like we've decided to begin a trade war on all fronts, and that's okay if the person who thought this through has an answer for why you go after partners that we have a very long storied relationship with. Maybe we give some developing countries a break because we're trying to actually get their economies functioning, make them look to the West versus to Chinese investment. So it just seems like, I'm getting my head around the alla prima approach. I'm not condemning it because I'm not a trade expert, but I still, at some point, and I understand that you are the trade rep, So if you own this decision, then I'll look to you to figure out if we're going to be successful. If you don't own the decision, I'm just trying to figure out whose throat I get to choke if it's wrong, and who I put up on a platform and thank them for the novel approach that was successful if they're right. But here's what I'm really worried. I'm not going to ask any more questions. I'm just going to tell you, every time we talk about people having patience, we need to understand that the founding fathers made damn sure that that patience was never more than about 14 months, really. Everything that we need to do to know what the political environment is going to be about next year, it's going to be done by February of next year. So in your mind, do you believe that over the course of the next 14 months, we're going to have a level of certainty, and the people in the trailer park that I grew up in who are going to bear the brunt of some of these short-term cost increases, maybe some job displacement for a period of time, how are they going to be feeling Groundhog Day 2027 or 2026? Do we feel like the majority of this will be resolved and I'll be able to thank whoever thought that the alla prima approach was a good idea? Because that's about the timeline we've got to work with.
Well, Senator, these people who voted for the president, is the same situation I grew up in. You know that.
I agree, but let me just finish here because I don't want to get in the way of my colleagues. Yes. I'll be 65 in August. Every day, 11,400 people celebrate their 65th birthday. That's 4 million a year. So let's say from 60 to 65, people are looking at their 401k statements. They did vote for President Trump. They voted for me. I hope that they will again in both cases. Well, maybe not the president, but I intend to run for re-election. I'm just trying to figure out if they're going to feel good about this, because a long-term play in American politics and a long-term play in American policy, public policy formation, is about 12 months from the beginning of an administration. I wish you well, but I am skeptical. Thank you.
Senator Smith.
Thank you, Senator Crapo, and welcome, Ambassador Greer. So it seems to me that President Trump has started a big trade war. And the war is with everyone on multiple fronts, with allies as well as adversaries. I think this is a little bit of what Senator Tillis was getting at. It feels really indiscriminate and chaotic. And apparently we're still just in the early days of this. And I just need to tell you that Minnesotans are freaked out. Farmers who are experiencing, you and I have talked about this, one of the worst farm economies in the last 25 years are looking at lower prices and higher input costs. Minnesotans who work on the Iron Range, which is the source of 80% of the iron ore that goes into American-made steel, they want fair trade. They want us to stand up to illegal steel dumping, but like 500 of them have been laid off because the demand for American cars has been slumping. I mean, I could go on in every sector. Consumers are freaked out. This looks like a giant sales tax to them. Retirement stock market plummeting, and it's very hard for people to understand what is going on here. So what I want to do is to get an understanding from you of what you see as the goals of this war that we're in, because at various times it's been described as goals to raise revenue, to stop fentanyl trafficking, close trade deficits. So is the goal here to raise revenue for the federal treasury?
Senator, this is not a trade war. We have, most countries have said they're not going to retaliate. We have an underlying emergency. The goal of this, of the trade deficit, where President Biden left us with a $1.2 trillion trade deficit, and the goal is to address that, and the offshoring that led to that, and the non-reciprocal treatment that led to that. That's the goal. Certainly there's a tariff revenue effect. If the countries do not do this, then they will be subject to the tariff, and we'll have a tariff on foreign goods instead of American-made goods.
So, okay, so if the goal is to close trade deficits, then that would mean that the tariffs are a negotiating tool here. Is that right? Is that how you see it?
So the
or
tariff.
Are you trying to use them to?
Well, it can go both ways, Senator. So on the first, we've talked a lot about negotiations because a lot of these countries, they have closed off markets to our exports in unfair ways. They've done it for decades, and nothing has persuaded them. Sitting down, talking nicely hasn't persuaded them.
But if you were trying to, so I'm all for fair trade, and I'm all for the idea that if somebody is not trading fairly with us, if they're not giving us fair markets, then we need to have a strategy to go after that. But yet this is a blanket approach. It's an across-the-board approach, which is going to contribute to raising costs, and that's why it just feels, I think, so chaotic to people.
Well, the trade deficit is a global issue. So you can't if you're trying to get the trade deficit, you can't just pick one or two countries and say, we're going to do this and become Swiss cheese. Like that would not be coherent. What's coherent is a global approach to what's a global issue, to take these countries country by country, figure out how we can address our trade deficit with them and address trade market barriers with them. And that's the right approach. And that's what's happening. That's what the president's directed.
But I mean, as Senator Warner was pointing out, we have I guess it's a floor, you could call it, a 10% tariff, even with countries where we have a trade surplus. And by the way, this formula that the administration used to assign this so-called reciprocal tariff it just seems so arbitrary. I mean, where did that formula come from?
It's straightforward and it's common sense. It came from White House economists, and they proposed that looking at a country's trade deficit is a good approximation of the net effect of the unfairness, of the higher tariff rates, the higher trade barriers, the unfair trade practices, the dumping, the subsidies, all of that. And that's how you can capture that.
Well, so would you adapt that because it's based on 1 year, and of course, trade surpluses, deficits can vary quite a bit from year to year. Would your plan be to change it if you get new yearly data? And then that would suggest, I guess, that the tariffs would be in place for a long time.
Well, we need to assess. Again, I think it becomes country by country. We have the baseline 10% to make sure there's no arbitraging of different jurisdictions. And all these countries that are subject to the highest rates, most of them have already come to talk to us about how to get it down. I mean, we have to take this step by step. We have to take it country by country to address these issues. The status quo just won't work anymore, and we can't do it piecemeal.
I'm not arguing for the status quo, Ambassador. I'm not arguing for the status quo, but I am questioning the rationality of this policy that is it's so chaotic, and it seems so arbitrary. It seems so internally inconsistent because, for example, if your goal is to onshore manufacturing, something that I think many of us on this side of the dais believe strongly, that we need to be making things in this country again, but then that would suggest that these tariffs need to be in place for a very long time, because what capital wants is consistency and stability and predictability. Yet at the same time, the administration seems to be arguing that we would be, waiving some of these tariffs if we could somehow magically negotiate, 50 new trade agreements with 50 different countries. I know my time is up here. I wanted to ask you a question about trade adjustment assistance, which I will follow up as a question for the record. Again, I think that my constituents are freaking out here, and I understand why. Thank you.
Senator Lujan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for holding this hearing. Now, Mr. Greer, it's been less than a week since President Trump started this, what I'll describe as a reckless tariff war. It certainly feels that way. Families are seeing higher costs. Businesses across the country are hurting, and we've seen one of the worst drops in the stock market in over 35 years. Do you believe that there's currently higher costs a week after the president put these tariffs into place?
Senator, we haven't yet seen how those costs are going to be allocated between the foreign producers and their importers here. We haven't seen the data on that yet.
Do you believe businesses are hurting a week after President Trump put these tariffs into place?
I've heard from a lot of businesses. Some of them are excited about the prospects. Some are concerned because they're import dependent instead of U.S. product dependent. So I know there are varying views on this.
Let me ask this question, because this one's based completely on fact, on something I think you look at every day. You probably have some of these numbers in your phone that I'm guessing might be in your pocket. Have we seen one of the worst drops in the stock market in over 35 years?
We've certainly seen volatility.
Have we seen one of the worst drops in the stock market in over 35 years?
I think, and Senator Warner talked about
We'll move on. If you don't want.
Well, I know everyone's concerned about Wall Street, and I'm just concerned about Main Street and getting these jobs back,
Okay, let's talk about Main Street, Mr. Greer. Last time you were here, I asked if President Trump's trade war would hurt New Mexico businesses and families. You dodged my question. You told me, quote, I can't guarantee economic outcomes. When I pressed you, you told me that you want me to, quote, you asked me to, quote, hear from me on what the impacts of these tariffs are. Well, Mr. Greer, I'm here to tell you today New Mexicans are hurting. I understand why you would not guarantee that New Mexicans wouldn't be hurt, because you probably knew what I thought then that we now see today, that this is hurting people back home. Now, I want to ask you the same question again. Yes or no, will President Trump's tariffs harm New Mexican businesses and families?
Senator, I just don't think they will.
Hey guys, welcome to the Fox 5 Live Zone. I'm your host, Guy Labor. Thank you so much for spending your afternoon with us. We truly appreciate you. Hey, another busy show today. It is power-packed in a major way. At the top of the hour, what are we talking about? You already guessed it, Trump's trade wars. Apparently, China, they're crying foul, saying that the administration is now bullying them. We're going to break it all down for you. Hey, did you hear? Shane Daughtery, yeah, the MMA star. Apparently, he's taken his talents to reality TV. Going to be on a new show on Hulu. It's called Got to Get Out. $1 million up for grabs. He's going to join us to tell us all about it. Can't wait for that. And then during our Celebrity Dish, we're talking, remember Usher and that lady he got kind of spicy with? She's finally speaking out. And the media prince is going to tell us what she had to say. All that and more coming up on the show as we take a live look at the White House. Hey, look at that. A beautiful day. If you like it sunny and chilly, that's exactly what's going to happen today. Partly sunny skies, somewhat chilly. Top out at only 49. Well, the future of a Maryland man who was mistakenly deported remains up in the air. Chief Justice John Roberts agreed to pause the midnight deadline, saying a U.S. district judge overstepped her authority when she ordered the return of the man in question. His legal team filed a reply just minutes after that order. Now, the Trump administration has previously acknowledged that man should not have been sent to El Salvador. The 29-year-old has a permit to legally work right here in the U.S. Trump argues that man is no longer in U.S. custody, and the government has no way to get him back. Well, a mysterious case out of Charles County where a Maryland mom vanished just over 1 week ago. 23-year-old Lesbia Guerrera, a mom of two, was last seen on March 31st and reported missing April 2nd by her boyfriend, who is the children's father. The sheriff's office says that evidence of unusual and suspicious activity was identified at their home and do suspect foul play. Detectives also found, quote, counterfeit federal documents belonging to her boyfriend. His name, by the way, and identity has not been released. Detectives confirmed that he was in the country illegally, and ICE agents have taken him into custody. At this time, he has not been charged in her disappearance. Well, protesters hit the streets of Washington, D.C. as Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu met with President Trump. A large group gathered near the White House, calling for an end to the fighting in the Middle East and the killing of those in Gaza. The demonstration appears to have been peaceful so far, no reports of arrests. Meanwhile, during their Oval Office meeting yesterday, President Trump said he is hopeful the war between Israel and Hamas could soon come to an end.
Well, I'd like to see the war stop, and I think the war will stop at some point that won't be in the too distant future. Right now we have a problem with hostages. We're trying to get the hostages out. We got quite a few of them out, but it's a long process. It shouldn't be that long.
That meeting, by the way, comes as Israel expands its footprint in the Gaza Strip. Staying in the realm of politics, President Trump threatened to add a new 50% tariff on China if Beijing doesn't remove its retaliatory duties by today. Meanwhile, Trump's U.S. trade representative now defending the administration's expansive tariffs in a Senate committee hearing that is currently underway. Joining us to discuss this and so much more, Canadian businesswoman and politician, Dr. Ruby Dalla, back here on the Live Zone. Always good to see you. Welcome back to the show.
Thank you. Pleasure to be back with you again.
All right, let's jump into it because, boy, do we have a lot to talk about. In this case, you already know. We're talking tariffs, and yet again, tariffs. It's now been at least 1 week since Trump enacted the tariffs across the board. And so, being that you're based in Canada, I got to ask, what's been the response thus far?
I think there's a lot of uncertainty going on across the country, especially with Canadian businesses and Canadian workers. And I think there's also been a lot of hurt and disappointment by Canadians because America and Canada have always had such a great friendship. But let there be no mistake at all, these tariffs are going to have a very negative impact on Canadian workers, on Canadian businesses. And I think that, that impact is going to be felt on the coming days and coming weeks, not only by Canadian families, but also also American families as well, because as a result of these tariffs, everything is going to be going up in price, whether you're buying a home, whether you're buying groceries, whether you're gassing up at the gas station, whether you're going out and buying products. It's going to have a domino impact and effect on the lives of families on both sides of the border.
Yeah, you hit the nail right on the head with that. Canada now responding in a major way, taking measures into their own hands by making their case to end tariffs on billboards. Have you heard about this? Apparently Pittsburgh and more than a dozen other American cities and towns now seeing digital billboards pop up that say, quote, tariffs are a tax on groceries, tariffs are a tax at the gas pump. Bottom line, the billboards now paid for by Canada, and it's, well, their way of trying to get the word across that they don't like it.
I think it's definite, that it's not only not liked, but the impact that it's going to happen with these types of tariffs, which are basically a tax that is being put on. So if someone wants to buy a home, well, the cost of lumber that is being imported into the United States, has already an anti-dumping tariff. There's an additional tariff that's being added. And when we take a look at the gas prices, those are going to increase. Every single product that any American is wanting to buy is going to come at a cost. And the cost is not going to be lower. It is going to be much higher. And I think that these billboards that you're sharing are one way of getting the message out of how these tariffs are going to impact American families on a day-to-day basis. I know the last 2 or 3 days have been spent, taking a look at the stock market and the negative impact that it has had, on businesses with the uncertainty that's been created. But I think in the coming weeks and months, we're going to start talking about the negative impact of these tariffs on American families.
Yeah, it's hurting a lot of folks, including American farmers, who say that the U.S. imposed tariffs on Canadian goods are already having a devastating effect on the local agriculture sector south of the border. Now, some U.S. farmers even say that the tariffs have already made it harder for them to produce in our country. Yes, the good old U.S. of A. This is really affecting so many folks in so many ways.
I would agree with you. You hit the nail on the head. I know that I've been on your show before, and we've talked about something very basic, and that's even the price of eggs. I mean, the price of eggs, we're almost at $8. And how does an average family who's struggling to make ends meet actually afford something that should be just basically a staple of life? So I think when it becomes difficult for people to put, food on the table because groceries have increased in pricing, you're going to start to have some real challenges. And one of the other areas that hasn't even started to be looked at is the area of travel and tourism. If people are losing their jobs because plants are actually closing down, they're not going to be able to have disposable income for perhaps the needs of life, or perhaps the wants of life of wanting to be able to travel or buy goods that are important to them. So I think that when you even take a look at tourism, we're almost down 40% of Canadians going into the U.S. You have a weakening of the dollar, you have the tariffs, anything that they buy in the U.S. coming back to Canada is going to be 25% surcharge. Plus you have the scrutiny of some of the U.S. Border Patrol agents. As a result of all of this, there's not a lot of Canadians that are actually traveling into the U.S. So I think that the tariffs have a domino effect, not only on people's pocketbooks, but also on lifestyle as well.
Yeah, and to your point, we know that flight reservations have plummeted from Canada to the U.S. over the past few months. Some would even argue that, well, Canadians are now boycotting the U.S. I guess that remains to be known. Let's talk about the U.S. and China, which is a big deal right now. I want folks that are watching us to look around. Perhaps you're watching us on your TV. Guess where it was made at 9 times out of 10? That coffee you're drinking, your coffee maker, guess where it was made at 9 times out of 10? It probably happens to be China. The China tariff, if you will, is a tax on imported goods. It's affecting so many Americans, but let's be honest, this may very well affect Canadians as well.
I think, to be very honest, it's going to impact the entire world. I was, you're talking about people's televisions and where they're watching, Fox DC from, but even, yourself on the phone that you were utilizing, I was thinking to myself, that's probably from China as well, or there's some component or some parts of it that are made from China. Everything that we use, and, whether it's through a part or whether it's through the actual, product or equipment, is made from China. And we're already up to 54% sense, I think, of taxation by the president. But we take a look in the coming days. I think the president said that tomorrow there may be an extra 50% of taxation, which would be 104% tariffs charged, to Chinese imports. And who's going to pay the price for that? It's going to be ultimately the American families in every product they buy, whether it's their phones or computers or any other device for that matter.
We'll end with this, and that is yet again tariffs on Canada now threaten the energy future in economic growth. That's what so many folks are now stating. Case in point, driving up the cost of hydroelectricity. That's going to hit consumers in the Northeast in a major way. This is proof in the pudding, if you will.
Michigan, Minnesota, New York, all of the people living there receive their energy from Ontario, which is our province in Canada. And our premier has said that in response to the tariffs by the president, that this energy that is being supplied into these three states would actually be taxed as well at almost 25 to 30%. Can you imagine the amount of utility bill that these people are going to have to pay, these families living in New York, Minnesota, or Michigan, because of these tariffs? I mean, everything across the board, whether it's utility bills of home heating or whether it's the cost of gas at the gas pump, everything is going to be going up. So I think that these tariffs are going to have a domino effect and impact, which unfortunately is going to result in people having to pay a lot more for every product, whether it's their cell phone, whether it's at the gas pump, or whether it's for a new home that they may want to purchase.
Yeah, the million-dollar question, where will that last domino fall? Yet again, that remains to be seen. We've been speaking with Dr. Ruby Dalla. Yet again, a pleasure always to see you right here on the Live Zone. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you. Always a pleasure to be back. And you're still invited to Canada. We'd love to host you.
All right. As long as you got the eggs, I'm there.
Eggs with some good omelet for you. Thanks.
Well, as investors continue to take a close look at the stock market, it has been somewhat of a roller coaster ride over the last 48 hours. So what is happening and what can we expect today and the rest of this week? With some expert insight, we welcome managing partner of Bellet Capital, Mr. Gerson Gibbs, back here on the Live Zone. Always good to see you, sir. Welcome back to the show.
How you doing, Guy? Pleasure to have me again. Thank you.
Yeah, no doubt. All right, let's jump into it. A lot of folks are worried about, well, let's just say the almighty dollar. So, obviously, we have seen somewhat of a positive day on Wall Street today. I haven't been able to say that as of late. However, that appears to be the case right now. Your take thus far, sir?
Well, my take is it remains the same. These tariffs, we knew they were coming, and this is all a business move. Is Donald Trump putting a fence around the American garden to make sure that he protects the space and protects American businesses? And he put these tariffs in place to ensure that we end up on top in the long haul. And I think that it's a great thing, and I think that the market is going to begin and continue to correct itself.
And so the question is that so many folks are asking, and I think you somewhat pointed it out, but why are investors so shaky right now?
Well, investors are always going to be shaky with regard to the media, depending on how the media approaches things. The media has been really rough on these tariffs, and unfortunately, it's like going back to the gym after you haven't been back in a while. It's going to hurt a little bit in the beginning, but ultimately you're going to be much better and much stronger if you stick to it. But investors are going to be a little bit shaken up because of the news, the shock of things, the change of things. Change is always a little bit difficult.
All right, so let's talk about one of the big stories of the day. In this case, it happens to surround President Trump in China. Apparently, China now coming out stating that the president, in essence, happens to be bullying them. We know that he, in essence, plans to also impose additional tariffs. And so with that being the case, do you think that this will ever come to an end? The tit for tat, it's going to continue to go back and forth, will it not?
Well, I don't think it's going to be tit for tat. I just think President Trump is a pretty strong and pretty shrewd businessman, and he has a pretty strong business approach. And unfortunately, this hasn't been the stance of America for quite some years. So states like countries like China are going to say it feels a little bit like bullying because it's just change. It's restructuring. We saw what happened with Israel yesterday, and Israel didn't feel that way. Israel felt that, what Trump is doing is right, and they dropped their tariffs or indicated they were going to drop their tariffs and are in line with what President Trump is doing. So I know China is going to be a little difficult because of all the business that they do in the United States. However, I don't think that it's bullying. I just think it's tough business.
All right, so many folks have walked up to me as I take the metro and walk in, and the number one thing they're asking me right now is, Guy, were the tariffs indeed necessary? To which I don't necessarily know if I have an answer. So I'm hoping you can do just that.
Well, the tariffs were necessary because change was necessary. We don't know if tariffs per se were the best approaches, but we're not the presidents, right? President Trump decided what approach he needed to take, and tariffs were the best approach in this particular scenario. The objective is to make America stronger. The objective is to bring more dollars into the pockets of Americans and make the dollar a lot stronger. And I think this is just one of his approaches. Whether it's right or wrong, I'm not sure, but it is effective. And we're seeing that right now.
All right, Mr. Gibbs, we'll end with this, and that is, should Americans and, well, let's say folks that are watching from any and everywhere just woo-saw, take a deep breath and just hold on for the ride? Is that what you would say?
I would say you should definitely woo-saw and enjoy the show. I think this is a great business soap opera that we're encountering right now, and we should just enjoy the show, let things settle down, and then determine what moves we need to make. But right now, just enjoy the show because negotiations are just beginning.
All right, yet again, managing partner of Bellet Capital, Gersony Gibbs, joining us right here on the Live Zone. Always good to see you, sir. Make it a great day.
Thank you for having me again, Guy. Bye-bye.
All right. Well, speaking of the market, my next guest says that while the markets may continue to rise and fall, long-term economic resilience has historically followed periods of volatility. Ultimately,